Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome in. Welcome to yet another patron Q&A with the MCDM team. I'm Dale Kingsmill. I'm here to be your guide on this day. Ask your questions to everybody. Welcome, James Intricasso and Geordie. Welcome to the team. So exciting to have you. There's a lot of love for you coming in from the patrons. We got a bunch of questions for you. They want to know about you. They want to know all about you. In particular, I wanted to ask on behalf of Gavin Grant, what's your favorite stuff to play at the table? Board games, war games, TTRPGs. Tell us about yourself.
I played Dungeons and Dragons for the first time in my life when I was 9 years old in the year 1982. Which means when I watch Stranger Things, it is a reflective experience. The Stranger Things fictional characters are 1 year older than me, and so that's what life was like playing, Dungeons and Dragons, and the most fantastic thing about Stranger Things is not the Dungeons and Dragons, is not the Demogorgon. It's the fact you could go riding bikes until dark and your parents didn't, come looking for you. Super into board games back then too, like the Axis and Allies and Shogun and that Milton Bradley line, was super huge. Got into all sorts of RPGs since then, bounced between Dungeons and Dragons and more storyteller themed games like Vampire the Masquerade, White Wolf stuff. Moved away from D&D for a while in the 90s because it wasn't cool and goth, like in my early 20s. But then third edition came around and it really drew me back, and I've been playing ever since. Totally. And I've a big shelf of books. If you panned out, you could see them. And then upstairs, I have like one of my walls in my living room is full of board games, like more than some game stores. So I play a lot of games.
That is so much cred in one little introduction. We have a question from a real small timer in chat named Matthew Colville, who's asking, question for Geordie, what's the biggest difference so far between video game dev and tabletop dev?
The biggest difference between video game dev and tabletop dev. The order of operations it requires for the audience to see your work is the biggest one. So I was recently a design director on a video game project on a small video game team of about 150 people working with the Unreal Engine and under a large publisher. And so every decision you make, the best way to describe it is every decision you make is like pulling a lever on like a Rube Goldberg device. And there's a chance that pull is a good or bad decision. Your ability to understand whether or not it's a good or bad decision is filtered through your own skills, the skills of someone else, the desire of someone else to fulfill, your goals, the limits of the technology. Whereas in pen and paper, tabletop, when I pull a lever, James goes, Geordie, that's too complicated. And then I can immediately kind of respond, and then we can get something that the players can sort of play, and then have a goblin kill them, like, oh, you were here this week is happening. So that's good.
I think we do need to begin with the elephant in the room. Since the last time we had one of these Q&As, we've had a shift in the core power roll mechanic from 2d6 to 2d10. So the villainy of the platonic solid is already here, or the non-platonic solid. I need to stop. So could you guys speak to the, I'm going to betray my nation and say math feel and the mouth feel of the 2d10 versus the 2d6. Will you, for example, miss getting to shout boxcars whenever you roll a crit?
I mean, absolutely. We will miss shouting boxcars whenever you roll a crit. But now you get to yell double zeros, baby, whenever you roll a crit, which is just as good. And the real reason we ended up doing that is because in a tactical game, we wanted to afford you the opportunity to get a lot of bonuses, right? Based on your positioning, flanking, for instance, or based on, hey, we've knocked this person prone. And we also wanted the opportunity to bring in penalties. And what was happening was, like, if you have a game that has 3 levels of outcome, right? And then you also have this tactical element to it, a D6 doesn't really, like a +1 bonus, right, is very impactful in that scenario. It can very easily bring you from one to the next. But it is not that enticing to many people. It takes a while to learn how important that +1 is, and depending on what you're trying to do and how difficult it is, it could matter more or less, right? And so we were like, okay, if we widen the field, we have room to grow. We have room to grow up, and we have room to grow down. And that meant that we could institute more bonuses. We could have more room for character creation as you level up and that sort of thing. Now, there's lots of games like Powered by the Apocalypse games, right, that have 2d6 with 3 levels of outcome, but it's much harder to earn those circumstantial +1 bonuses in those games, right? And so in our game, it's a little easier to do that, so we needed more space and more wiggle room to be able to grow the game. But the power roll remains basically the same. It's just that you're rolling 2 10-sided dice now instead of 2 6-sided dice. And now, you know, like skills and edges and your characteristics, all of that kind of stuff factors into it, and you get to add bigger modifiers, and you get to make people subtract more and stuff like that. So it's great.
And I know in the patron Discord channel this morning, there was a lot of talk about whether it is safe to start buying D10s, 20-sided or otherwise, for the game. So we'll see whether this one sticks or not.
Yes. Today, I got a message from our producer. We now have an executive producer here that was like, I need to know, are we confident on D10s? Because there's, you know, stuff that we're doing, like getting the Ajax box ready and stuff like that. And he was like, we need to, are we locked in on D10s? And I gave the yes, I feel very confident about D10s. So we're locked in. So I'm going to have people very mad at us in our production arm if we do change that at this point. So that's what it is. Yeah.
I think it's important that the audience gets the D10s before I corner the market and get them all, because, you know, I need a cast of characters for those daily photos.
People are gonna have to get them secondhand from Geordie. But now we all know that we can shout double zeros, baby! I want to talk a bit about character creation. It's the thing I have been the most kind of hyped and waiting for this whole time. So I'm very excited. I definitely sat down with character creation rules and just drafted up like 3 characters, one after the other. Character creation at this stage involves constructing the culture that has kind of influenced your character ahead of becoming a hero. So you're picking an ancestry, an environment, an organization type style of upbringing, a career, a class, and an inciting incident that have all had a hand in shaping your character. And Subarab Roy wants to know how intensive you think that homework of character creation is expected to be with, say, someone who's new to a TTRPG with the help of their director.
I'll let Jordy speak to this because I guided Jordy through character creation with a group of folks here on staff a couple weeks ago. It does seem like it is fun, and it results in people building a pretty rich character backstory. One of our testers has a group of people who don't typically play D20 fantasy games, right? They're playing like a Jane Austen RPG right now, right? To give you an idea, The Good Society. It's a great role-playing game, by the way. People should definitely check it out.
Story Brew is great company.
Like, I'm going to run them. It's a great company. It's a great company. And was like, I'm going to run them through this, right? I'm going to run people through this who are big on character to see what they think. And they really enjoyed it. So it can be an intense experience. Right now, it takes probably about an hour to make a character because it's a new game, because we don't have all of the tools in place. But I imagine once you know the rules of the game, once you've got it under your belt, right? Like, you will be able to do it in probably like 20 minutes to a half an hour, and you'll be able to guide somebody else through it. But there are a lot of choices that you make, like you're choosing powers and you're choosing things like that. But we have made it sort of streamlined and easy. It doesn't take as long as, say, picking 4 first level spells from a list of 30, right? Like you might do in D&D if it's your first time.
It's interesting because I've heard James, you and Matt talk about trying the Traveler, style career path. And what effectively you've done is it's actually a Traveler style career path, just streamlined and with a little bit more agency, because you pick, your ancestry, your culture, your career step by step. And like with the incident, you were discovering your character. And I think this is an important thing for the way Matt runs games. He prefers it when players discover their characters versus coming in with an idea whole cloth. The system will support whole cloth, and I think when we have a bunch of examples, for things, it'll be easier to sort of pick from the list. But this encourages a bit more creativity, so you construct your character to like an element you may not have thought of before.
I love that aspect of it. Like I said, I specifically had a character in mind. I set out to make this character, and I got distracted on the way because I was looking at these ancestries, and I thought Revenant sounds really cool. What about a Revenant though instead? And I started looking at that, and then I sort of ended up creating this whole separate character that I didn't intend to make because I was kind of beguiled by these other options along the way. It was only the third time trying to make this character I originally sat down to make that I finally actually did it. Have you gotten much of a response so far from people trying the character creation system, the difference that they feel in a process that drives you narratively to create your character rather than through sort of numerical bonuses?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of interesting responses, and you know we're light on some of the options right now. Not every career is in there right now, for instance, because we're sort of testing the concept. Not every inciting incident is in there because we're testing that concept, and it's. One of the things that we have learned, right, is that people who come with an idea, right now they're a little disappointed because it's like, well, I wanted to be, you know, in a street urchin, and there's no street urchin thing that I can do here yet. And it's like, well, there will be eventually, you know, that sort of thing. But that people have had a good time discovering who their character is through this process of building and discovery. And that has been really rewarding, I think, for us, because it does allow a sort of level of specificity that, like, hey, when I leave this, I know why I have the skills that I do, and I know some things that have happened to my character. And we have, you know, the first round of feedback we got was really good, particularly on stuff like inciting incidents, where we're like, okay, people like this idea. They like having something that gives them a benefit and a drawback and explains that this is why you became a hero. But they feel like the incident isn't really telling them why they became a hero right now. They want that. They want what this promises, and we're not delivering. So how can we deliver on that promise better? So that made me feel like, okay, good. We're in the right direction. We're telling people you're going to get what you want. Now we just got to make sure they get it. And I think maybe we've done it with incidents this time around. We'll see.
We have, again, small-time YouTube creator, shout out to Matthew Colville, asking, can you folks share some of the new incidents now that they do belong to classes?
Yes. So the idea right now is, originally inciting incidents were just a big list, right? And you rolled or chose on this table of like, this is what happened to me and I became a hero because of it. And in general, there's story information there that is with details that are left intentionally vague so you can weave it into your backstory, right? And so to help make it why did you become a hero, right? We tied it to class. And so we said, why did you become a shadow? Why did you become a fury? Why did you become an elementalist? As opposed to just, why did you become a hero, right? And so we've got some fun stuff like that. So like, for instance, the conduit, the first incident that you might get for the conduit is cultists captured you while they were raiding your home and began an unholy ritual to turn your body into an undead spirit. The ritual failed when a follower of the god or saint you now revere came to your rescue, but your body became infused with rot magic, turning you partially incorporeal, right? And so the benefit of that is you can move through like one square of wall and move through doors and stuff like that. Fun. The drawback is that like you're more susceptible to negative energy, and so when you take corruption damage, you take more damage. You're vulnerable to it now, right? And so all incidents have a benefit and a drawback, and benefits and drawbacks are weighed against each other. So if you have a really good benefit, the drawback is also going to be very detrimental. But it's like that little bit of story about like, oh, okay, this happened to me. This is also how I came to revere this god, because somebody who in service of that god came to my rescue, right? And that's how I maybe first learned about them or that sort of thing, right? Now, we don't say you have to, and that's why you follow this god now. Maybe you had a tumultuous journey after that where you were like, no, I hate this god. And then, all those details are up to you. So that's just sort of one. There's another one. I'll share one more. Let's see. Of the elementalist. An evil mage threatens someone you love, and you blocked their summoning of an elemental creature by absorbing the magic into your body. You're now infused with the power of an angry elemental, right? And so studying the elements may help you control or exorcise the creature from your flesh. So you get extra stamina, and that stamina increases as you level up. That's a really big benefit. The drawback is that when you drop to 0 or lower stamina, the elemental takes control of your body. And the elemental desires destruction of any kind and attacks the closest creature they notice without regard for who that person is or what is happening to your body. Like, they'll risk bodily harm because it's not their body. They don't care, right? So, big benefit, big drawback. Right, that kind of thing. Now, they're not all like, oh, something threatened you and then you did stuff. Another one is like, another elementalist one is you found an ancient library when you were lost, and you started to read the books in this library and learned a bunch about the secrets of the universe, and now you're an elementalist, right? And the benefit is you can go to that library at any time, and you've got lots of research materials in there. The drawback is the books can't be removed from the library, so you have to go to that library to do research in it, right? Stuff like that. The smaller benefit, smaller drawback.
Another aspect of character creation, the careers currently each come with an associated title, which is described as being a little bit like feats, but they're usually earned through sort of great deeds and bestowed upon you by the director. And Micah Peltier wants to know how much you're budgeting for these kinds of sort of extracurricular rewards in the power balance of the game, because they love giving their player these kinds of rewards, but they also worry about kind of accidentally making their own life harder when it comes to encounter design.
I'm going to let Jordy talk about there's a huge benefit of titles that involves the end game that he was the first one to figure out, and so I'm going to let him talk about that. Titles and treasures and things like that, they will be able to be given at the discretion of the director, right? And that's part of the coolness of them. If you want to give a lot of titles, you totally can. However, we also want your character to be manageable for you so that you're not like every time you're rolling, seeing if you have a title that applies, right? And we want them to be fun and rewarding when you get them, not like, oh, another title, what am I going to do? So we're going to have advice for the director about, hey, it's probably good to give titles at about this clip, and here's how you give them out and stuff like that. But there's not going to be a attunement thing where you can only attune to 2 or 3 titles at once, right? Nope. Titles are going to be that thing that, like, now maybe you could be stripped of a title. That could be fun. But for the most part, right, it's going to be like, here's the pace at which you should give them out. If you want to go faster or slower, here's what it means for your campaign, and now you're in control of the reins. And there's a good reason for that. Jordy?
Yeah, to build on that first is title guidance, like pirate law. They're more guidelines than actual laws, right? So if your campaign wants to go faster, you can go faster. If your campaign wants to go slower, you can go slower. But I think one thing that's important for us is with the condensed level progression from 1 to 10, we want you to use every tier of level progression going forward. But there is a little bit of a psychological perception. Oh, I'm going to get to 10 and the game is going to be over. No, the game's not over at 10. You keep playing. And so you can imagine, these epic dungeons, epic threats give you titles for completing them. And so level 10, you get incremental progression that could be basically infinite. You sort of, a little bit like an MMO, but, more in the narrative context of like building these larger than life heroes that are world shaping. Your world shaping titles at level 10 can be quite impactful, but you're gonna have to work for them, right? And we give you sort of goals to work towards.
Yeah, I just got we have somebody, Paul Hughes, right now, a great designer, is working on some titles for us, and it sent me some sample titles, and like one of the most epic titles you can get at level 10, right? That it's recommended, like give this one at level 10 is like, hey, when you die, your body wakes up in a sanctified room in your stronghold, right? And so you're effectively immortal as long as that room exists, right? Stuff like that is what you're going to see, and even more powerful too.
We were retuning one of the classes of the Fury, and I originally had a feature in there called Harbinger of the Primordial Chaos, and they would get rid of well, it has to stay as a title because that sounds like a title.
The thing that we're really here to talk about today, I've made people wait long enough. Class design and the beginnings of level progression. You've done 5 classes that have been sort of reworked so that now we can see how they progress from level 1 to 3 each of them with at least 3 available subclasses. Bestest Finn asks whether the plan right now is to follow these 5 classes through to 10th level before starting on the others, or whether you'll sort of spread out the love between the classes on the way.
That is a great question, and one that we're working on with the production team right now. And the answer is probably, now that there is more than one full-time designer on the team, we may start doing both. Right, and we're staffing up. There's another designer yet to join the staff who's coming next month, which is a week from now, next month. And so we're really excited to like hit the ground running with the full team, because it means we're going to be able to do things like, okay, you know what? We need to start building out things to level 10 now, and we also need to start working on the null and the talent, right? So let's go ahead and, Jordy, why don't you, you made the Fury and the Tactician. Let's bring them to level 10 now, all right? And new designer, are you interested in working on the null, right? Like, well, we'll have a brainstorm and we'll work on that. Are you interested in working on the talent, right? Like that kind of thing. And so we'll be able to parallel a lot of these things, which is very, very exciting for us. And the plan is to basically do that, right? Like that once we feel like, okay, we understand the first 3 levels and how this works, now we need to understand the next few levels, but we also at the same time need to understand how these other classes work, and now we can do it at the same time. So that's the plan.
I want to talk about the sort of overall structure that we've got for the classes right now. It seems like you choose what type of shadow or tactician you're going to be right away, pretty much. It's not as though you became a shadow and then later decided to specialize. It's like, no, I specifically became this, poison, toxin alchemist type shadow guy. That was the thing I started learning, and that's what I am. And so there's kind of a pretty heavy feature load up front at level 1, which I think was to be expected, but it really is a lot once you've got your sort of kits and class features and your opportunity attack, and you sort of, once you're getting it all together, in level 1 you're getting close to sort of 10 features for your character, plus the possibility of ancestry features like we see with the Revenant. But from there on, it kind of seems as though character levels kind of drip feed those features. I mean, they're exciting drips, don't get me wrong. Josh Riddell asks if there's sort of a methodology that you've been using to decide how much power should come with each level. Like, are you trying to keep the power increase pretty linear, or are you kind of vibing it out? Are you happy for some levels to feel kind of extra special?
So we think of the game in tiers, and Jordy was here for all of these incredible meetings that we had. Jordy, Matt, and I, and Lars and Gertz. We all had these long meetings about like characters and stuff, and I think we had started it with, you'll probably pick your subclass, at second level most of the time. And then it became, actually, we're doing it for first level. And I think, Jordy, I'll throw it over to you once I'm done this thought here, because I'd love to hear about why you think that happened. Because I think it was the right decision, and I'm really glad that we ended up doing it. But the big thing about tiers, right, is that, like, you can think of the game as like 1 to 3 is one tier, 4 to 6 is another, 7 to 9 is another, and then 10 as its own tier. And you get big increases at each of those. Well, right now we only have 1 to 3, right? So what's happening is like, hey, you get like maybe another ability and another little something at second level, and same thing at third level, right? Those are the things that were, and part of that is because you get so much at first level, right? That we were like, okay, let's give you something a little bit more powerful that you can use here at second level that'll make you feel cool and awesome, but you've already got a lot of toys to play with too. So we want to make sure you get time to play with those tools, and then at fourth level you'll probably get like characteristic score increases, you might get more skills, right, that sort of thing. So you're gonna see that that's how the game progresses, is like you might have these levels that are like, hey, I've entered a new tier, and this level is telling me that because I get a bunch of stuff when I hit those levels, and the in-between levels allow me to appreciate having gotten that stuff, and I still get cool things, right? Like I still, if you're a green mage, right, an elementalist, at second level you can turn into a bunch of different animals, and so you have like fun things like that you can still do that are thematic, that will make leveling up fun and make you more powerful. But those big increases are going to come as signposts of like, you've now entered a new tier. You now fight different kinds of villains. You now save more people, basically. You go from saving towns to saving cities to saving the world to saving the timescape.
Yeah, like when I was looking at classes, like Tactician and Fury in particular, we had already talked about, well, maybe some classes need to specialize level 1, like the conduit, because you pick the god and you pick the domains. It felt so core to the fantasy to make that choice then. And we said, well, other classes could pick later. We're like, oh, the shadow can pick later. But the approach that James took with the shadow was like, well, you make a choice. You were recruited into a college that is built into the presentation. And so it's not like, oh, I'm going to flash back at level 2 about which college I picked. No, from the beginning, you went to, the College of Caustic Alchemy, and that changes the way you play. And that started kind of cascading to the other classes is by making a choice tied to your fantasy. One, we make sure you sort of hone in on who your character is. But two, we simplify some of the design. Our original group discussions for the tactician were like, well, we want the tactician to be able to mark and taunt. And taunt is an already existing condition. And so there was like, do you get your taunt first? Do you get your mark second? And on revision, it was like, oh, actually, every tactician marks. That's the core mechanic. And then your specialization decides what the mark does. And so that way, the melee tactician, the vanguard, taunts. But, the insurgent weakens, the mastermind slows, and that builds the basis for the engine without everyone having to do every engine. But thematically, they're the same. Thematically is you pick a target and you optimize your party around fighting that target, but the way you do it is different. And that worked elegantly. And so that sort of cascaded out. Every class should pick a first level or specialization so we can make those calls.
Sort of touching on some of the stuff that you said, we've got Ben Ward in chat asking, do you think the character is more their subclass or their class? And Cole Wallace as well on the patron post was curious how you drew the line between what is an ability for every shadow or every fury versus what does go to a specific shadow or fury or tactician.
It's funny, the subclass DNA, I think when we started this discussion, I think we sort of thought like it would be like a 70-30, right? Like your class would make up about 70% of what you do and your subclass would make up about 30%. And I think we've definitely tipped that balance more in favor of subclass, right? It might be 50-50 now. Certainly your class, your class determines how you get your resources right now, for instance. Your class determines a lot of your like very core abilities. Now, everybody might have some sort of rider on some of your core abilities, like Jordy was talking about with Mark. And I think we also think of it on kind of a class by class basis, right? Like for the Elementalist is interesting because you can build something very geared towards your subclass, or you can build more of a mage that dabbles and picks a bunch of different kinds of magic that they use, and like, oh hey, I specialize in this one, but I also do green and I also do fire and earth, even though I'm a void mage, right? So to some extent it depends on the class itself, right? Like the conduit you build your subclass. So we have domains, but you pick 2 domains, and both of those domains make up your subclass together. So like Jordy and Dale might both be war mages, but Jordy might be war and storm, and Dale might be war and life, right? And then when you're picking abilities, you're picking from 2 sort of different trees. So Jordy might be more war than storm. Dale, you might be more life than war, right? And so you could be very different even though you have these 2 domains. So it sort of depends on your class and depends on what choices you lean into as you're going into it. There's a lot of customizability there. I would say, though, that like all tacticians, right, the nature of their abilities is such that they are moving their allies around, that they are giving allies extra actions, right? That they're occasionally healing and stuff like that. So even within your subclass abilities, some abilities are going to do similar things, right? It's just that the way that the insurgent does it might be different than the way that the mastermind does it, right? So you're going to see a lot of that. And then you're also going to see a lot of thematic abilities. Jordy actually made a lot of these for the Fury and for the Tactician, where you did this cool thing, right? Where it would be like, hey, everybody gets this, but it is like this. I did it in the Elementalist too. Everybody gets a ward, but your ward is different depending on who you are, right? So there's flavors like that. Jordy, you did it too with the Fury. You did some really, really cool stuff, and with the Tactician when it came to like grouping subclass abilities that sort of do the same thing.
Yeah, it's kind of finding a rhythm, right? And so a good tactician example is each tactician has an ability to help an ally in trouble, right? And so we tried to, through various iterations, ways to do it. And the original version was like, oh, it's even better if if your ally is dying, and James is like, well, that means the party's going to like cheese themselves and have themselves be dying. Okay, let's strip it out. And so they all built around a mechanic that, hey, someone's in trouble, let me go help. And how I help is I intercede, I do damage to the enemy, and then I put a fear effect, so the enemy is afraid. And so the Vanguard, the melee, Knight Protector, that's a trigger. Oh, yeah, one of my enemies is in trouble, they're attacked. I'm gonna go intercede, and then based on how many opportunity attacks I take, I'm gonna let them heal more, and then I'm gonna put fear on the person I protect. So don't pay attention to them. I've taunted you. The Mastermind, it's similar, and it's from a distance, sort of shoot and then like, hey, come look at me. And the Insurgent is like, they rush forward and they sort of swap places and they put the fear in themselves. No, we're gonna dance and you're gonna be afraid of me. And so there's a core like rhyming mechanic in essence. They're all like, letting the ally get recoveries back and applying fear, but by sort of tweaking the way that's sort of done, you get the characterization. It feeds into the directive I think Matt gave, which is no oatmeal. Like there's everything's characterful about what we do. Like everything is fits into the timescape, fits into Orden or Vasilori specifically. And if players or directors want to strip the IP information out, they can. But we're not presuming that. We're presuming you're coming in because of these character moments. You're coming in because our Furies are tuned to the primordial chaos. And there's a reason that they get angry.
Oh yeah. What I'm gonna say might sound controversial, but I do mean it as a sincere compliment. When I was reading the document, I skipped straight past the conduit and I was going straight for the shadow and the tactician, and then the elemental, and it's because I was excited. You know what that's what I mean when I say I mean it as a compliment, because I was excited to see what they had to offer. And then when I came back around to the conduit, and I do want to talk about the conduit, because I felt like going from the shadow and the tactician to the conduit, I felt like I had opened an eldritch tome, or like I was looking directly into the sun, looking at this class that asked you to build from the ground up what your subclass is, on top of the already kind of bonkers virtue-wrath dichotomy that's kind of there. It's just the parade of possible domains really is a lot to take in.
Yeah. So there's a good question of, is that going to work? Are players going to like that? Will they think that is fun, right? We have sort of a back pocket approach to the conduit, where it's like, hey, the other way we can go about this is you pick your domain gives you a little something, right? Your domains give you stuff, but they're not as impactful. And then instead, every church has conduits who are like, hey, we're healers. Hey, we're war priests. Hey, we're oracles, right? And those are the subclasses. Is like, you are a war priest of Kaval, right? Or you're a war priest of Gruul, right? And you have the same subclass. It's just the god you have is different, and maybe like, hey, my abilities do holy damage, your abilities do corruption damage or acid damage, or right, whatever. So that was one way we thought of customizing it, and at first it was like, you know what? This is going to be the way to go. It's going to be easier to playtest. It's going to future-proof things. We're like, this is probably going to be the easier way to do it. And when I was a champion of that idea, right? Like we were like, at first we came in, we were like, we need 12 of these domains, and it's going to be you pick your domain and stuff. And it was a really cool idea. And I remember leaving, and I was like, man, that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Like when I was like, no, we can't do that. We should do it this way. It felt like it sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And then our producer, who was in that meeting the next day, was like, hey man, I slept on it. And like, it seemed like we were all excited about this one idea. And then we were like, I don't know, it could be risky, and now we're not even going to try it? That seems weird. And I was like, that does seem weird, and I've felt bad about it too, so, like, let's go for it. Let's just give it a shot and see if it works, and, we'll have some rounds of playtesting to tell if it's going to work or not. And so that was what we've done. So far, initial reaction to people reading it has been very positive. People seem to really like the idea of splitting these domains, and it was really fun. And it made me think about, like, now whenever you see Aquaman in something, Aquaman used to be a joke, right? And now whenever you see him in something, there's, like, been a big effort to make Aquaman as cool as possible so that people want to read his comic books, see his movies, play with his action figure, right? And I feel like the conduit priests, clerics, have kind of been done dirty in D20 fantasy for a while, right? Like, they're often, there's jokes made about them as like a box of Band-Aids on a skateboard that rolls around and heals people and doesn't get to do as much cool stuff, right? And so that was also part of the approach, was like, how can we elevate the conduit the way Aquaman has been elevated, or the way, frankly, 5th edition sort of helped elevate bards, right? Everybody wanted to play a bard when the Player's Handbook came out. And so, like, how can we make this a moment where people are like, conduits are amazing, right? And make it the thing that the player who is the min-maxer, right, wants to go play, and it's like, no, I'll be the healer. Don't worry about it, because while I heal, I can also call down lightning and do all kinds of cool stuff at the same turn while I am saving your lives. So that's sort of the impetus for where it's come from, and why we have this kind of wild way of doing things. But we do approach each class with an open mind, right? And we want each class to feel different. And I think, right, like the Elementalist feels very different from the Conduit, who feels very different from the Fury, right? Like even the Fury and Tactician, who could both be frontline melee fighters, their classes feel wildly different. And that to me is a really good thing, that we have achieved that.
With a mind to that kind of level of choice and the amount of features that a character can have at first level, we've got several people. We've got Matthew, Michael, Mitch, and more, all asking about difference in complexity across classes, not just feel, but actual complexity, and whether you think that certain classes or subclasses will end up being easier to play than others, or more wieldy for, say, new players, and to an extent, whether you deliberately intend to design some that way, or whether that's driven more by the fantasy that's being evoked.
The directive from a minor YouTube celebrity, Matthew Colville, is no oatmeal, right? And so, like, we specifically had a conversation. The reason we went with Tactician instead of a baseline fighter is we wanted even the base, the bog standard class to have some depth to it. Now, that doesn't mean it should be difficult to run, and that doesn't mean that when you look at the class, you don't have the option to sort of pick a very straightforward engine to sort of play around there. But, the game we are building has a bit more of intentionality there, right? It's more of a tactical game. The grid is not optional. Tactical choices are not optional. Forced movement is not optional. It is sort of built in. And so there's sort of a bar there that, as long as we present in a straightforward way that's easy to understand and usable, I think we can rely on the players sort of rising to the occasion. And a big part of that is user experience presentation. There was a thread in our Discord yesterday where I talk about this. Is there complex ideas you can convey by reinforcing the simpler aspects kind of at first? And so that's what I think we're going to need to work on.
Yeah, and Jordy is really great at visual presentation. The other designer we have coming on is also really great in that, and it's already elevated the game in terms of like I made some stat blocks, and I am not great at visual design, and I was like, well, I know these could look better, but I don't know how. And Jordy was like, give me a second, and it was like maybe an hour later that it was like, oh yeah, that is way better, right? And just elevating things like that has been hugely helpful, and it will be hugely helpful for onboarding people, right? I do think that like there will probably be some classes that it will be simpler to build than others, but we don't really have a let's make sure we have a simple class directive, right? We have a let's make sure you want to learn this class because that's going to be a fun experience, right? We want what happened to you, Dale, that you open up the book and you're like, oh, I can't wait to play this. And so that's what motivates you to read the abilities. That's what motivates you to pick stuff. And I do think that like I often teach D&D to new people, right? And often new people are like, I don't want to be a fighter. I want to be a wizard. This is a world where I can do magic stuff, right? And it's like, okay, here's how a wizard works. And then they sit down and they're like, there are so many first level spells that I need to pick. Well, I should probably pick, Tensor's floating disc. And then the other people will be like, no, don't pick that. Don't you want, you want to take something like Tasha's Hideous Laughter. That's going to be more helpful, right? And so it feels like there's all these things you don't know and you don't know how to pick. Whereas like, yes, you will pick abilities, right? But when you pick from abilities, it's like, hey, pick from these 4, pick from these 2. Right? And so you have choices to make, but those choices are not as complex as picking 6 first level spells from a list of 30, right? Which is bonkers. And if you're like, oh, you know what? D&D Beyond will help. Guess what? Now you have all of the spells from all of the supplements to go through too on D&D Beyond, right? So it takes forever
And
to
they
pick
have to
spells
learn
in
how to
D&D.
use D&D Beyond.
Yes, that's a great point. So I do think that like it's not more complicated than building a 5e character, and I think most of them are less complicated than building a 5e wizard, but probably a little bit more complicated than building a 5e champion fighter.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really valuable thing to understand because it has been my experience as a DM for 5e that when I'm bringing in a new player, it's like, yeah, okay, a barbarian or a champion fighter might be straightforward and easy for them to pick up, but how many of my new players actually want to play that thing? No, they want to, I introduced my sister to D&D for the first time the other day, and she wanted to play the Magic Pudding, which is an Australian children's book character. He's a sentient pudding. Look, it's unimportant, but the point is that I had to kind of, and it was like a level 6 one-shot that someone else was running that she was joining in on. So I ended up having to, make this sort of bespoke character sheet that was like a monk, and I just cut all the chaff and just, stripped it back, and it actually worked really well. But I think the point, the lesson I took from that story is people want to play what they want to play. They're going to be more interested to play something they're excited about than something that's simple or straightforward, and that really a lot of what makes it complicated is the way that the information is presented. I think that's
Dale, I speak for all of us when I say we need to know more about this pudding.
Its name is Albert, if that helps. Miranda Hawthorne and Tom Flynn were asking regarding kit choice as it currently stands. So, for example, will the Panther kit feel different as a tactician, as a fury, as a shadow even? And it did make me wonder, actually, are there restrictions? Just as the example to follow through on, would a shadow with the flavoring of a dagger be allowed to use the Panther's kit, the Panther kit's devastating rush feature and get that +4 to their top tier damage and just say that it's them hitting a weak point? Or will there be restrictions that are like, you are absolutely wielding a big axe or something?
No one's going to come to your house and take your books if you play this game differently. And you absolutely could say that, like, hey, my heavy weapon, right? One reason we leave heavy weapon sort of open and don't say big axe, right? Or giant sword is because maybe you want your heavy weapon to be like a really wicked looking dagger, right? And you can justify that as a heavy weapon. Sure, absolutely. Like that kind of thing. That's the beauty of kits, is you can really customize the look of your character. Where it might come into play are things like magic items, right? So there will be magic items that are like heavy weapons. And if you want to use that heavy weapon, you need to use it with a kit. But it would be very easy then to say, as the director, right? Like, this in the book, this heavy weapon is a big axe, but when you find it, it's a dagger, right? And you can use it with your Panther kit because you want to be a shadow who uses the Panther kit, right? So the idea of all of that is very legal. The idea, right, is that, like, there are some kits that might be more of that thief flavor that will probably synergize best with what the shadow can do. So a lot of shadows will be walking around as, you know, cloak and dagger as their kit, or sniper as their kit, right? Things that we would expect. However, you could probably make a pretty killer Panther that is the shadow, and the Panther, right, is sort of the Conan fantasy kit. And Jordy, would you say that Conan is a bit of a shadow himself, based on the subclass you made of the Fury that we keep referring to as the Conan subclass?
Yeah, we made the Reaver kind of have a little bit. It's got a little bit of the shadow. You know, it's got a little. He went on the Shadow Exchange course, you know, to sort of, you know, go study in Shadowland across the ocean, and, you know, pick up some of the traits there. You know, I think another thing I would add to the conversation in kits is they're cinematic, right? And so part of cinematic is there's different ways to represent what's going on. And I happen to, with my two classes, the Tactician and Fury, do weird things with kits, you know, to sort of take advantage of the mechanic to make them cinematic, you know. So it was Matt who suggested, hey, maybe the Tactician has two kits. And so I ran with that. The Tactician has Field Arsenal as a core ability. They pick two kits, and they pick the best of both kits. Right? They don't stack, right? But they're the only class right now that can get force move resistance and, like, mobility, right? Because you can pick the right two kits. And that can be conveyed in different ways. And so imagine, if you will, you wanted to make Legolas as a mastermind tactician, and you picked two kits. You know, you picked, like, sniper, you know, for his longbow, and then you picked, like, cloak and dagger for his, like, twin knives. And so that lets him have a good melee attack and lets him have a good ranged attack. And so you can imagine there's times he's doing it like right out of the movies where he's shoot, and he switches to knife. But sometimes he's doing, you know, the peak Legolas beat where he takes an arrow, he stabbed an orc through the eye, his melee attack, then knocks it and shoots another one with his ranged attack. Like, there's not an explicit kit, you know, stab people with arrows. He's blending the two cinematically in a way that's cool.
Hell yeah. And I also, I mean, this is just sort of splintering off to talk more about the different sort of tactician abilities. Something I've been really excited about is the way that that several of these classes and subclasses interact with sort of aspects of the game that we've seen less of at this stage. But, you know, thinking about the way that the tactician interacts with kits, we've also got abilities in there, and people were asking about this. Yes, we can confirm there are abilities in here that explicitly interact with other systems within the game. There are tactician abilities that improve research. There are tactician abilities that improve your sort of standing in negotiation. How's it been designing with a game that so far has been so combat focused? Has it been kind of freeing to suddenly turn around and sort of shine that spotlight on other sections of the game?
Yeah, it's been great. Oh man, coming up with stuff that is useful outside of combat is really fun, right? The Earth Elementalist has an ability called Hole, where it's like, oh, okay, you can just, like, create a hole in a stone or a dirt wall, and everybody gets to walk through, right? Or you can create a hole in the ground, right? And you can go to the next floor of a building if you're in a stone building, right? Like, all kinds of cool stuff like that. And one of the fun things is also imagining, like, how can these things be used also in combat, right? Like, I think some of the best stuff in D20 Fantasy are abilities that, like, they're just always useful, right? Like, Dimension Door is great in combat. It's great out of combat. And so I remember I wrote Hole, right? And then Jordy was like, and I was like, okay, it's like a minute to use so that it can't be abused in combat. And Jordy was like, yeah, but like, what if you could use it in combat by spending essence, your heroic resource? And I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's like a great idea, right? And so, and this is like, stuff really gets elevated now in these meetings with 3 of us there, right? Sometimes more than 3 of us there, because it's like we're building on what everybody is saying, which is really, really great. And sometimes then the opposite happens where like the combat informs the fantasy. In the Fury, there is a Fury called the Stormwight. And Jordy, do you want to talk about what they can do? Their cool utility stuff, because it's pretty cool turning into bears and stuff.
Yeah, so the way the Stormwight works is instead of picking a normal kit, they pick a kit that's an animal aspect. At the beginning, you only know one, but eventually you can shift into different animal forms. And like one thing I wanted to convey was like when, let's say you're the bear. I think Matt wants to call it Beowhite. It's a less cool name right now, but a Beowhite, they turn into a bear. And when I originally pitched it to James, I was like, yeah, they can command other bears. And James was like, I don't know. I don't like the idea of mind controlling bears. Like, oh, no. Let me refine language. When in bear form, you're considered to have too high a renown when negotiation comes into play with bears. And James was like, yes, that's it. Because you're the king of the bears. Like you're bear royalty. So normal bears are like, oh yeah, boss, I got it. I'll follow your lead, right? And so that sort of cascades out. So like at level, they're as they're tied more to the primordial chaos, they can speak to any animal. And like, yeah, the bears, they're kings to the bears, but they're like a duke to other animals and elementals. It sort of creates this moment where like, you can imagine this rough and tough, warrior tearing stuff out and like, hang on, and just goes talk to ravens and bears and animals and sort of works out a way around an encounter that doesn't require combat. But it's core to the fantasy, it fits.
What could be better? What could be better? I want to be King of the Bears. I want to play every possible character. DR says, you mentioned that you want to strongly protect the niche of every class / subclass. For example, the conduit should be the best at healing people, but they wonder if this also creates a unique challenge in regards to party composition and the impact that can have on things like encounter balance.
That is a good question, and it's something that we test pretty rigorously, right? That's one reason we test a lot. Is like we test a lot of combat because we know that that's where the game can break down and become unfun if things aren't well balanced. As in, one player can do stuff that the others can't. That's never fun, right? The players are never challenged, or they're always too challenged, right? That sort of thing. In terms of party composition, right? I think we want to have a thing where, like, if you have a troubadour and a conduit and a tactician, right? All 3 of them can heal. The conduit is the best at it, and that will be obvious, right? So that's the first sort of thing, right? The niche protection. The tactician is going to be the best at all 3 of them can also do this, right? Like give people extra actions and move them around, right? Like give you extra movement. But the tactician is best at that. And then there is the troubadour. The troubadour is going to be the best at like buffing allies when it comes to like doing that, but also the tactician, right, and the cleric can the conduit. Whoa, they're coming for me. Are going to buff people, right? So like that's going to be part of it as well. They each do these things individually. Now, when you have that much healing, right, what does that mean? Well, it means that we look at the other stuff the conduit does, and we might crank it down. The conduit's not going to deal as much damage as somebody like the Shadow or the Fury, because their thing is dealing a lot of damage, right? So the way your party survives, right, if you don't have a conduit, right, let's say you have somebody else who heals, but you have, instead of a conduit, you've got a Fury. Well, you don't need as much healing because the Fury is going to waste the enemies faster and give them less of a chance to damage you, right? And that's sort of like the very basic balancing healing and damage, right? There's a lot of things that we balance that way. Battlefield control, we made this big list and we rated each class and the mobility, right? Debuffing people. And so we look at that. And I think there are a lot of games like the game we're creating where if you were to, say, have a 5th edition D&D party of all barbarians, your game experience is going to be very different than what is intended, right? You first of all, at like the first from levels 1 to 5, you're just gonna tear through combat. You're never gonna be challenged probably, and then as soon as you start getting creatures that cause you to make like intelligence saving throws, you're probably gonna TPK. The first time you meet a mind flayer, you're all dead, right? And so like, yes, if you create a party of all conduits, you're going to be very good at healing, but combat is probably going to take a while because you're just going to be healing each other and not dealing as much damage as you could if you had a different party composition, right? So you can certainly unbalance the game in different ways that maybe it's not intended and that we don't think most people are going to play, so we're not really worried about that. But you should be able to play a party of all conduits and still have a fun time. So that's sort of how we approach those types of things. It's funny. Jordy has not worked here very long, so there are some conversations that like we've never had, and I'm interested to know what you think about this, Jordy, because this is not necessary. We don't talk a lot about party composition, or we haven't yet.
Have the conversation live now.
Live conversation. So I think as we test these new tier classes, and this is coming up as James asked me to build an encounter for our testers to A/B test a presentation. But part of my methodology going in was like, well, we just refreshed the Fury, the Tactician, and the Shadow, and the Conduit. They're all much more powerful than before. And so I looked at our balance guidelines. I'm like, nah, they can take more. They can take more. And so, and in fact, what if they could take a lot? And so the encounter is built to be very challenging. It's like in 2 phases, and we'll see what the players do in response to that. But I think part of that is to identify tactical holes, like tactical niches that the enemies have too. So I use the term the brood squad. You can imagine, hey, 5 players, let's do a tactician and 3 furies, 1 from each subclass, and a shadow. That will do a lot of damage. It's the brood squad. It'll just annihilate their people. But if enemies can counter their mobility, slow them down or immobilize them or take advantage of the terrain, they're going to get peppered, right? And so this is going to be a thing that's going to be important for us to sort of teach directors early on. And I think some of the work we're doing with roles, some of the work we're doing to do with terrain is going to sort of show you don't have to get that D&D moment where the barbarians are all powerful for 5 levels and then it's the int save that gets them. It's the barbarians are all powerful if they have control of the battlefield. And so if you can deny them control of the battlefield, the director has more tools to make the encounters interesting.
Thank you so much for answering our questions today. I look forward to the next one, which should be in a month's time. We've plotted ahead this time, patrons, so you can kind of expect more frequent Q&As from here on in. Thank you so much, Jordy. Thank you so much, James. Thank you, patrons, for joining us. And I feel like I have to be seeing you.